Hi folks, I'm Mike Medea, Head of Education Programs at the American Philosophical Society, or the APS. Haven't watched one of our career chats yet? That's okay. If you have, thanks for being part of our community. If you need a quick introduction to the APS though, be sure to check out our website or follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So, we're here to discuss the many careers offered by an organization like the APS. As a museum, research library, archive, and membership society, we have great staff who do work ranging from administration to publications. Career Chats showcases these staff members and introduces you to careers you might not have considered before. I ask the staff members a series of questions during these interviews. If you've seen the page for the series and have a question about a certain career, be sure to submit one. We'd love to hear from you. Now that you have some basics, enjoy learning about APS staff and their careers. Thanks for joining us this week for Career Chats. I am honored to be joined by my great colleague, Adriana Link, the head of scholarly programming here at the APS. How are you doing today, Adriana?
Doing okay, Mike. How are you?
Just swell.
Good.
So for the kind of like first section, we'll go a bit more into what your actual career is, and then we'll move on to the other sections. But to start things off, could you just give us your name again and your title?
Sure. I'm Adriana Link. I'm the head of scholarly programs here at the APS Library and Museum.
Cool. So what do you actually get to do as the head of scholarly programs?
Yeah, so I like to say that my job actually has two parts. So the first part is that I oversee our growing residential fellowship program. So as part of that, I do everything from advertising our available fellowship opportunities to managing the selection process and working with the committee to choose our fellows, and then to facilitating their experience once they're actually here on campus in Philadelphia. And we have anywhere from 10 to 15 fellows and residents at a time. It's a combination of long-term and short-term fellowships, and people from a wide variety of backgrounds. So as Mike and others have no doubt said in these career chats, the APS's collection strengths are in early American history, history of science, and Native American and Indigenous studies. But through our fellowship program, we get folks who are working on those and a wide variety of other subjects. So it's really exciting to see them come through and learn more about their work. So the second part of my job is related to that. And that's to cultivate the APS's scholarly community. And the fellows really are kind of the core component of that. And to do that second part of my job, I organize and run a series of events that are targeted mostly towards academic or scholarly audiences that include a weekly brown bag lunch, works in progress seminars, lunchtime lectures featuring recent books published by authors who have used collections at the APS, and then 2 academic conferences a year. I also oversee an Indigenous Studies seminar, which is intended to bring together faculty and postdocs and scholars and others in the area who are working in that field, as well as writing seminars for our fellows. But scholarly programming is always evolving, and there are many more programs that I could mention, but these are sort of the core events that I oversee here.
And honestly, if you're exhausted listening to that, you should be. Adriana's job is exhausting, and major credits to Adriana for being able to do all of it in multiple goes. So I feel like after listing out all the fellows that you work with, it might be a weird question, but does your work tend to be solo or as a team?
Yeah, so I often joke about how scholarly programs is a department of one, which may be true on paper, but really isn't true in practice. I'm really fortunate that I get to collaborate and work with really almost everybody at the APS. I work a lot with Patrick Spiro, the librarian and director of the APS Library and Museum, with Kyle Roberts, who's the associate director of Library and Museum Programming, who's been a really great collaborator. So, at the top level, but I also work a lot with the administrators. So I work with Brenna Holland, who's Patrick's assistant. I also work with Jessica Frankenfield, who runs our communications. And then, of course, with our facilities staff to help break down and set up events when we have them in person. So, And then, of course, with our department heads, people like Mike and our center heads, the Center for Digital Scholarship and the Center for Native American and Indigenous Research, Byron Miller and Brian Carpenter. I'm constantly working with them to think of ways to highlight initiatives that they're putting on. So yeah, it's really an exciting job in that on the one hand, I'm kind of steering in multiple directions, but I bring in people offshore all the time, and they help direct where we're going.
Yeah, and again, if you're exhausted, yes. Up to that point. But I love that, like, especially us being the programming heads of things. Like, I love hearing you talk about it too, because it's like, as much as our jobs could be similar, I feel like they're so different in so many ways. But that aspect of, like, you might have like the title head, but you are working with people constantly. As much as you have to work on your own, it is rarely a solo task. If anything, it's a lot of just coordination and getting people. But herding the cats is good.
Yeah, lots of cats all the time.
Lots of them. Smart cats.
Good thing I like cats.
This is true. So how long have you been with the APS?
I've been here for just over 3 years now.
Nice, right? And I think that's a really fun part about this season of Career Chats is that, like, we have both, like, you and me, like 5 years and under, and then like talking to Mary and Val of like over 15 years. You never know who's going to walk into an organization and when, and like having a nice breath of fresh air like Adriana is a massively important part in like kind of like knowing organizations and seeing how they function and kind of updating them a little bit as much as we can, which is always good. So what did you do before working at the APS?
So right before I joined the APS, I was a postdoctoral fellow. So I myself was once a fellow at the Center for Humanistic Inquiry at Amherst College. And at that time, I was meeting a bunch of people who had no idea what academia was like. And they said, like, what do you do? And I'd like to joke that I got paid to sit in a really fancy office and think thoughts. It was a really nice office. But one of the things about Amherst that I really appreciate in my time there was that it really whet my appetite for the potential of interdisciplinary work and exchange across the humanities and kind of the real benefits of engaging with scholarship that is way outside of your comfort zone. And I really do that every day here in my job as head of scholarly programs. I mean, our fellows, as I've said, are coming from all over the place, and just being able to ask questions and think of ways to find connections across projects that may be happening in like totally different time periods or different parts of the world, like that is a skill that I really got or really refined during my time at Amherst. Before then, I was pursuing my PhD in history of science at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And during that time too, I was really fortunate to be able to work in a number of collections. So I worked at the Institute for the History of Medicine in their rare book room, processing things and making enclosures for rare books. So I coming here too, I really appreciate the work that our conservation team does, because it's so impressive to see just the skill and the thoughtfulness that goes behind creating things that keep materials safe and accessible to users. So I did a little bit of that, but then also I did a lot of things. But also during grad school, of course, as part of my dissertation work, I spent a lot of time in archives, particularly the National Anthropological Archives and the Human Studies Film Archives, going through materials, researching, and these places still feel very much like home to me, and I'm forever grateful to the time that I spent there.
And with yours too, I really like the kind of, though they seem possibly winding, they all are very connected paths that can lead to like a career like yours, which I think is like really interesting, where like if you don't think about it as like holistic bits, then you're just kind of left with like, well, I kind of worked on like crates one time for like,
yeah,
you know. You can like always examine these things in like a holistic way, and I really appreciate that about that response. So another possibly weird question after having heard that, but how did you first learn about or hear about this kind of field of work?
Yeah, so you know, I was thinking about this with these questions, and I guess the first real exposure that I had to this kind of a job was right after college, when I worked as a docent at the Eisenhower National Historic Site in Gettysburg. So I graduated college in 2009, like right after the economy tanked. Yeah, it was good times. So, and I remember feeling just so excited to have this job that I think it paid me like $950 for the summer. It was like no money at all. But I remember just feeling so fortunate to A, have landed a job right after graduating, and B, to have gotten a job that utilized my degree, my bachelor's degree, which was in history. But I think that that was the first time that I was really tasked with doing research and putting together programming for a broader audience. And I think that that was really what encouraged me to consider a degree, an advanced degree in the humanities. So thanks Eisenhower, thanks IPFARM.
It's always good to give shout outs where they're needed. And I think that's a cool thing too, right? Where programming and like whenever we do things for people are always thought about with audiences in mind. And like, I think that the scholarly audience with a public program mixture is like a really fun piece of it too, where like you do need that background being able to work with a broad public, because not all scholars are the same. So it's important. So what would you say are the education and experience expectations for your job?
So since the primary function of my job is really to cultivate a scholarly community and have an understanding of what's happening in academic fields, I'd say that it's pretty critical to be an active scholar in one of the fields that is represented in the APS Library and Museum. So in my case, the fact that I have a PhD in history of science, but also that I work on the history of anthropology is a big plus, because I'm already kind of plugged into those communities who would be looking to the APS as a place to come do work, to come have conversations, to share their work. But that said, and I do want to make this point, that I feel like every job that I have had in my life, no matter how inconsequential, and I have done everything from running an after-school program for pre-K and kindergartners, to catering, to waitressing, to manning an information desk. Every single job that I have had in my life has in some way or other prepared me for the job I have now. So I cannot, part-time summer jobs, I cannot stress how valuable those experiences were for teaching me patience and for organization, but most importantly for making a really nice cheese plate. These are really good skills to have.
Big picture. But yes, absolutely yes, because those jobs more than anything else will teach you exactly that, like that patience, dealing with people. And you want to talk about transferable skills, you're not going to get more transferable than something like that anyway. So yes, cool. Now the hard question in this section, I guess, what are the pros and cons of your job?
I mean, if it's not already clear, I think probably the best part of my job is getting to work with our fellows. I love so much hearing what people are working on and how they're thinking about materials and how they're using collections, and watching kind of those aha moments happen in seminars. Like that just like fuels me every day. And also as somebody who really not that long ago was on the job market, was navigating that crazy academic world, I love the opportunity to talk with our fellows about strategies for navigating the market, and to offer those words of encouragement. And it was really just like a demoralizing experience. I mean, it feels so personal to get those rejections from opportunities, because the work you do as a scholar is so personal. So it's great to just be able to be that support, to say like, it's not you, your work is good, it's better than good, it's great. It's the system is a funny place, and you'll find the thing that works for you, when the time is right. I guess the other thing that I've really enjoyed is kind of expanding my professional network beyond the history of science and history of anthropology. I think working in a place like the APS, which is all Franklin all the time, you can't help but learn a lot about the history of Philadelphia and early America. And through that exposure, through doing that programming, I've come into contact with a lot of really fantastic people who I probably would not have met otherwise if I had just stayed within my own circles. So I guess in terms of cons, I guess the one thing that I will say is that being a department of one and running so many different kinds of functions means that I'm pretty much always busy, and sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, especially when you've got like multiple events going on at once. But I'll say that, you know, I'm never bored, and I'd much rather be busy than bored. So I will leave it on that note.
That's a good tactful way of saying. But like even within that too, right? So I think there's a good point where if you are watching this and ever thinking about an academic career, it is a different job market, and think about that and know that, and like do your research to figure out what the academic job market is like before pursuing something like that. Outside of just like I want to get my degree in this, think about it, really do. But also the reading into job descriptions, like kind of like foreseeing the future a little bit, right? Like where if you have to like read those job descriptions, because like if you read either of ours, I'm sure that it would sound absolutely bonkers, but like you're not right, but but you like you read into it, think about how much you're going to be doing, and then kind of like move forward with these things. Because if it sounds underwhelming, then it might not be good for you. But if it sounds overwhelming, maybe it's a good challenge for you. And you, again, like if you don't like to be bored, go for the overwhelming things. It's more payoff. So how do you see your field changing in the next 10 years?
So I'm not going to talk about history of science, although I could. I'm going to talk about, you know, this job. And I think, you know, the answer to this question might have been different a couple of months ago than it is now because of COVID. And I'm sure, Mike, that you feel similarly, that our shift to this virtual world, virtual programming has really necessitated a different way of thinking about what it means to do any kind of programming, to think about who are our potential audiences, how are we formatting our events, are they accessible to the people we need to make them accessible to, and what are the opportunities in doing this kind of work. So, you know, I think that the next 10 years probably will increasingly demand programming that can accommodate both in-person and virtual audiences. I think but I do think it's going to be really exciting to kind of be on the ground and involved in that process. Like you and I are really figuring it out day by day, and there's something really exciting about being part of that whole project for what inevitably is going to be the norm going forward. I think too that in addition to COVID, that the recent calls for racial and social justice have also placed new demands on the academy, as fewer jobs will require both graduate departments and students to recalibrate their approaches as well as their justifications for producing and disseminating scholarship and expertise. But as I think I was saying yesterday to Dave McCullough, our new postdoc fellow at the museum, you know, I think these moments of crisis also do create room for reflection and new opportunities for engagement and collaboration. So it's just, you know, it's inconceivable to think that those demands for more inclusive and politically oriented scholarship would not affect the types of programming that we put together and who our partners could be for the foreseeable future.
Right, yeah, you'd be very concerned if it didn't change, didn't change any of that, which is great, because I think like, and it's so interesting to think about, like if you're a high school student watching this, these answers directly impact that, because in 10 years this might be the kind of job that you're getting. So knowing exactly what this weird time capsule is kind of like, it's really helpful. So always think ahead with certain things. It's weird that I say that, because now we're going to move on to section 2, where we're thinking backwards and talking about Adriana of yesteryear. So what were you like in high school?
You know, it's funny that you bring this up now, and I hadn't thought about this, but I just spent last weekend helping my dad clean out our childhood home, and I had like in my walk-in closet in my bedroom, I had this whole shrine of posters to like my preteen interests. So, I mean, that's an aside, but I just now that I'm thinking about yesteryear Adriana, I just have like the mental image of my creepy closet.
Things taped on walls.
Yeah, it's, you know, we were all there at one point, but anyway, so in high school, I think I was fairly insufferable. I was one of those people who did everything. Surprise. You know, I was on student council, I was in honors classes, I was the lead in the musical, I was the head lawyer on the mock trial team, I was the editor of the yearbook. I was president of the environmental club, which I think we met once, maybe. You know, I did all of this stuff. And honestly, like now that I do like maybe a fraction of that stuff, I wonder how how I had energy to do any of it back then. But yeah, I think I was definitely an overachiever, and I only have maybe 5 friends from high school who I still talk to, and there might have been a reason for that. But I think, thankfully, I did mellow out a little bit in college and in grad school. But yeah, high school, I did a lot of stuff, and looking back, I wonder if that was necessarily the most fulfilling thing to have done. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time, but now in hindsight, I wonder, like, maybe I should have just stopped. Maybe I should have done a pause.
Yeah, and that's like a nice little word of wisdom too, where it's like either go do all of the things as long as they are fulfilling to you. Learn those time management skills in high school, like weirdly, like learn those then, which you don't think about, but like that is time management, like to a T, right? Or like hunker down, find the 3 things instead of the 5 things that are more interesting. But that's a good insight though. So based on this interest though, I wonder where this question's going to go. Is this what you thought you would be doing in high school?
No, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. For the longest time, I thought I was going to end up in law school. And, I did mock trial for most of high school, and I really loved the whole theater. I mean, I did theater too, but I loved the theater of the courtroom in particular, and kind of this notion of putting together evidence to make a case and make an argument. And I guess it is something that I do as a historian, but I at the time, when you do history in high school, it's terrible. You're memorizing facts and regurgitating dates. It's not interesting at all. It wasn't until college that I got into history. So like being a lawyer and getting to piece together and create stories from evidence was like totally my jam.
Yeah, which is like where you got to do that instead of in the history classroom.
Right.
So word to the wise, hang in there with history. Keep it in the back of your mind. It's a great option for storytelling. It really is. So jumping ahead a little bit, what were you like in undergrad?
Yeah, so in undergrad, I was still fairly involved in college life, a little less so. I think I played French horn in high school. I think that was my entry interview into college, was I was talking about how I played French horn, and then I went to college and I like never picked up the French horn again. So I found that in my closet over the weekend. But yeah, so I think my student life in college took on a bit of a different flavor than in high school. So I went to Bryn Mawr College for my undergrad, and if you're not familiar, Bryn Mawr is one of the 7 sisters. It's a historically women's college, and it's really this kind of self-selecting environment of highly motivated, smart women who, like me, were probably overachievers in high school. And, whereas in high school, I feel like I never quite found my people. Like in college, I was just surrounded by people who were very much like me. And I actually do remember in my first semester that it was really jarring to not, to be around all these people who sort of thought the way I did, and or not always the way I did, but you know what I mean? Like they had the kind of same sense of drive and motivation and aspirations for their future, and really took their education seriously. So, it was nice to know that I didn't have to be the only overachiever in the room. Although I will say I still ended up double majoring in English and history. So once an overachiever, always an overachiever.
Thing to lose. So then with those majors, I'd like to repeat the question, is this what you thought you would be doing while you were in undergrad?
No, still pretty committed to law up through junior year. So I interned at the Hall of Justice in Camden, New Jersey. I worked for this wonderful judge, Judge Vogelson, who he could never say my name right, so he always called me A. But he wore like these great like polyester disco suits underneath his judicial robes. It was a good time. I will say, if you're interested in pursuing your career, try to get an internship, even if it's an unpaid internship, because there's no better way to understand what it is you're getting yourself into than to try it out. Word of advice. But I guess my sort of feelings about my career started to change after I spent a semester abroad in Australia. And this is something else I'll say. If you have the opportunity to get out of the country and experience another culture, get out of the country and experience another culture. I know it's kind of hard right now with COVID, but it really did just like change everything about my approach to life. So this is the story I always tell too, that I was on this this tour of the eastern part of Tasmania. And I got on this tour and somehow I lost my wallet, like within the first like day of being on this tour. And, you know, Tasmania at the time wasn't really known for its cell phone reception, and internet was not really widely available. And there was no way for me to like do anything about the fact that I had lost all of my credit cards and had like $10 to my name. I did have my passport, so it was fine. But I remember very vividly that being on this tour and sitting at the top of Wineglass Bay, which is has this insanely gorgeous overlook, and thinking like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to be able to have these kinds of experiences. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be in an office from 9 to 5. You know, like I want to have the opportunity to go see the world and travel. So, you know, I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew that law was maybe not, at that point, like law was maybe not the way to go.
Nice. Which you're doing a great job of setting up for transitions here too, which is fantastic. So that's part one of an aha moment, right? So what would you say your aha moment was with this career trajectory overall?
Yeah, so again, this is a very vivid memory. So I think I was just starting either the fourth or fifth year of grad school. It was probably the fifth year, and was just sort of starting to dip a toe into the job market to see what was there. And you know, I went into grad school with no desire to teach. Having worked at the Eisenhower National Historic Site, having an interest in museums, like I wanted to be in public history. I wanted to connect with people. I didn't want to. I mean, I know you connect with people as a professor too, but I wanted to connect with different kinds of audiences. So I was finding the job market to be really kind of discouraging. And then I remember seeing the advertisement for the APS's postdoctoral curatorial fellowship and thinking to myself like, oh, there are jobs that I can do. There are career opportunities. And I think I applied for that fellowship like 3 times and never got it, didn't even get close. But you know, it really gave me hope that there was something for me. And look, somehow I still ended up at the APS. Yeah, so that was, it's funny how these things
Twists
work
and
out.
turns, you know, twists and turns everywhere. But it's good though, right? Within that, there's a piece of sometimes you won't get the job that you think you have at, or even like at the same place. Like some things change, things move around, jobs open up or they close down.
But I guess one thing I want to add too is, you know, there are certain institutions that attract certain types of people. Yeah. And I had been at the APS when I was an undergrad doing some thesis work, and knowing what I knew about this place, I knew that this was a place where I would fit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having the collections and the strengths that it does, and you know, my brain space matched this place, and you know, figuring out what job was. It was very lucky that it ended up the way it did, but this place always called to me as a career and as an employer.
And that's a good thing too, because you talked about internships, but also like either doing research, getting those part-time jobs, or getting those internships. They not only show you what the job itself or that career might be like, but more importantly, whenever you even do an interview, you're interviewing other people as much as they are you. So if you don't think it's a good fit for you, that's a red flag automatically. If you feel like you might belong at a place, that's always a good sign. So that's a good kind of like sideline there. Oh gosh, wow, look at this. Okay, so say I'm doing an informational interview. We're doing great with transitions with you. And what kind of questions do you love being asked about your job? Are there any questions that I should avoid in an informational interview? And do you have any like email pet peeves or things like that?
Yeah. I think I said this earlier, but you know, I really love talking about and being asked about my career trajectory because I think it's so important to demystify the process. So thank you, Mike, for doing these programs. It's really great. And I, as I just said, I know that I'm very fortunate to have landed in my position at the APS. And I know that a lot of the reason for it was because I was very lucky and because I worked to build up my personal and professional networks early in grad school. So when I talk to other PhDs and people who are interested in maybe pursuing careers in GLAM institutions, I always tell them how important it is to get involved, to build connections, and honestly, that it never hurts to just reach out to people to see what kinds of opportunities exist. The worst thing that they can do is say no, but sometimes they'll say yes, and sometimes they'll say, oh, I have a colleague who's starting to think about that, or, oh, like maybe you should talk to this other person over here next door. So it never hurts to send an email asking people what's going on. This is how people remember you, and this is how you build your network. So I'll get off my soapbox.
No, but that's true though, because like sometimes you never, and I can't tell you the number of times that maybe I've gotten an email because it's like education, but I'm like, nope, Adriana, this is you. They'll probably pass you off to the right person anyway, or even if it's not the same institution, they'll pass you on to somebody that's better able to answer your questions. So it really does, it never hurts.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are most people are more than happy to help and to talk about their experiences. I guess to answer your other questions, in terms of questions to avoid, I guess a question I don't really love, but I wouldn't say I wouldn't avoid it, is about how I balance my own scholarship while working a 9-to-5 job. So the answer is sometimes you don't. It's really hard, and I think there is a lot of value, particularly for people who are thinking about pursuing these kinds of positions, to just be honest about the limitations of this kind of work. There's a lot of really great things about my job, and I'm really, really lucky to be able to still engage with people's scholarship. But do I wish I had a little bit more time to think and do my own writing? Totally. And you have to kind of figure out the ways to carve that out and pursue it. It's not gonna, it's not part of my job. So I have to work that much harder to see it happen. Mm-hmm. Email pet peeves. I hate Miss or Mrs. Link so much. It's like either call me Dr. Link or Adriana, or don't call me anything at all. Be like Judge Vogel said, just call me A, but don't call me Miss or Mrs.
I love that loop. I hope that was planned. But that is a great thing, especially like now when we are far more open about pronouns, like gender expression and identity. Never go right out the gate with a gender specific title or a salute. It's not a good choice. So when you know somebody has their PhD, just default to doctor.
We worked really hard for it.
Yeah.
It's 2 letters, but we worked really hard for it.
Especially in that case, like even if it's more formal, it's better to be more formal than it is to be highly informal. So just go for that. Yes, cool. Thank you for that. But like to your point too, with the kind of the questions we asked or like not asked, I think within that there's like a good kind of like note of don't be too personal with your questions either, because like your scholarship, like even though like it is like a career and like it's this thing that exists outside of you, it's a highly personal thing. So think about it that way, and I think that's a good tip to have as well, kind of like buried in there. Cool. Okay, so we can move on to the third section of this, which is really about the APS object that demonstrates your work. And I love that like, you are continuing the trend of like, it's not like a physical object, but this thing that actually fully represents your work in so many ways. So I'll share my screen and show this page, which is 1, really out of your own design, and 2, filled with far more things that you've done than I've done. So I think it's like a great case of what's going on at the APS, but also what your career entails. And if you ever need a listing of it, it's all down here. And again, if you're exhausted looking at this list, there's probably a reason, but I'll let you talk a bit more about the virtual offerings.
Yeah, so I guess when Mike asked me to choose an object, I was really struggling because, I mean, one of the drawbacks of my position is I don't have as many opportunities to work with the materials, which is fine. I connect people to the materials, but as a result, I was having a hard time coming up with one object. But we built this website when we shut down because of COVID to try to summarize all of the programming that we had created via Zoom or virtual offerings. And I think that this website is a good indicator, as Mike said, not only of the different types of programming that I do and that Mike does, but also of the kind of resilience and ability of people who do programming to pivot and to troubleshoot in the moment. So, you know, we took what could have been a really, could have just halted everything. We could have done no programming. And we took that and we built an entire set of resources and list of events that we continue to update. So if you're interested in the APS's scholarly programming and education programs, this is a really good place to find them, happily curated in one spot.
Wonderful. And of course, just give a shout out to our colleague who made this lovely image of Franklin holding an iPad to kind of hint at the virtual offerings. I think Cynthia made that. So it's beautiful. You never know what's going to be crafted at the APS, from programming to images. It's always a good guess, you know. Cool. So thank you so much, Adriana, for all of those answers and taking the time out of your very busy schedule. If you didn't already get that, it's a very busy schedule to talk about your career. I really appreciate it. I think there are so many great takeaways within this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. It was a lot of fun, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody who happens to watch this. If they have questions, you know, shoot me an email. I'll probably answer it. As we just said, always it's okay to shoot the email. So again, thank you for joining on Career Chats. If you ever have any questions for any of the people that we're interviewing on Career Chats, be sure to submit those in advance. We record on Tuesdays and air them on Thursdays, so get those questions in on time. And we'll see you next time from Career Chats at the APS.